Welcome, everyone, to the Lead Generation World Podcast. My name's Mike Faree. Thanks again for joining us today. We've got a great show in store for you. We got Nima Hakimi from Convoso with us today. So we're going to talk about all things call center related. Convoso is an excellent call center technology platform that does so much more than just makes outbound dials, and that's why I love to talk about it. But also get to hear a little bit about Nima's experience with growing the business over the 14 years and hear what he's got projected even moving forward. So I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget, Lead Generation Week is coming in May. We're opening up the app April 27th, so people within the Lead Gen ecosystem can get to networking and connecting with other individuals, and hopefully start building some business, during these challenging times. So don't forget to go sign up. You can go to leadgenerationworld.com. At the top of the page, there's a Lead Generation Week link, and you can go there and register. Otherwise, let's go ahead and bring Nima in, and let's start talking a little shop. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Lead Generation World Podcast. My name is Mike Faree. We've got Nima Hakimi here with Convoso. Welcome, Nima. How are you?
Good. It's good to be on. Doing all right.
Yeah, I know it's crazy times. I just want to start off. I enjoyed. It's been like podcast marathon or webinars going on here. Just so much content going out there. But I saw the podcast most recently with you and Rob from the Leads Council. I thought it was excellent. It was really great to learn more about what you guys are doing and all that sort of stuff. And it was great. Great job by Rob as well.
Yeah, Rob's always a good one to talk to. He can talk for days on end. But
yeah,
I try to keep it short, but it was a good conversation for sure.
Yeah. So, how long have you been a part of the Leads Council? What sort of made you, join that group?
So let's see. It's been about, I want to say, a year.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time we've been in business for about 14 years now. And for a while, we were kind of under the radar in the sense that nobody really knew who Convoso was. And so we're trying to figure out, what associations are out there and learn more. And, that led me I think we just did a Google search and came across Leads Council. And so a lot of the names on there were familiar, but, ended up reaching out and talked to Rob, and we kind of hit it off. And then from then it kind of, it made sense to join the board and really get more involved in the industry and everything.
Yeah, no, they definitely have a good mission, right? They're trying to promote best practices and help companies sort of navigate some of the regulatory challenges of the industry. So, it's always great to be a part of initiatives that are doing that in the industry.
Yeah, 100%. We knew a lot about, regulations, but even myself, I've learned so much more since joining the board. So I feel like it's a good opportunity to network, but also educate yourself on a lot of ever-changing things that are going on in this lead gen industry.
Yeah. One of the things I learned, though, about you, and what I was really intrigued about, was sort of your efforts with, your corporate culture and your company culture there at Convoso, and you really sort of hold on tight to that culture. And I think that's really impressive. And I was actually going down your LinkedIn profile, and I saw some, what do they call recommendations or I think they call them recommendations on LinkedIn, where people write sort of notes. And even in some of those recommendations, there were comments about the culture and being, a thoughtful leader within your organization. And I just thought that was, really, really great. And I was kind of curious to know, with a company that's, 14 years old, where did the focus, has it always been a real focus for you to have sort of a specific culture or treat employees that way? Or was it something that was developed over time?
Definitely, I would say developed over time, because when we first started, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, right? You're just kind of like starting a business and you're hiring people and you're just like, hey, we need help, right?
Yeah.
And you make a lot of mistakes along the way in terms of just hiring because you have a need for some help that you need to solve a problem, whether it's in support, sales, whatever it may be. And over time, you learn it's not just about filling that need, but it's around the type of people that you need that have the same kind of values that you do, right? To kind of go in the same direction. Because if that's not the case, then it doesn't work out. So there was definitely a build up, and we've had, our ups and downs on that. And over a period of time, it's gotten to this point. So it wasn't always like that, but and it's an always ever evolving kind of world, right? We always want to improve and improve that culture. It's never perfect. We still have our days where things are just not great. Employees might not be happy, but we always we're proactive around getting back on it and making sure we maintain a really strong culture.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, you guys have been around for 14 years, which is, geez, I mean, that's like in dog years, like internet years, call center years, that's like 100 years. That's a long time to be around and continuing to grow. Tell me about how Convoso came about. Your partners with your brother, which I mean, that throws a whole other dynamic, I would imagine, into it. But where did Convoso come from?
Yeah, so in 2006, at the time, so my brother and I, we've always kind of done different businesses. We're very entrepreneurial ever since in high school. We had different businesses. Like we started having music websites. This is back before Napster was around, right? Like kind of started there. We just were always into, building businesses. And in 2006, we weren't really doing much. And my cousin had a mortgage company. And he had a call center with telemarketers, right? And so he was looking for a dialer because at the time we were just doing it manually, just picking up the phones. And, he was looking for a dialer, but whatever was out there was really expensive. He didn't want to make that investment. And at that point in time, voice over IP was just coming around. Everything was starting to go into the cloud, but it was very new. And so he came to my brother Bobby to see if he could build something, because he's the engineer. He kind of knows how to build things. And so we took this open source dialer called Vichidal, which a lot of call centers still use today. Yeah. He set it up for him, and it was more of a favor. It wasn't okay, let's start this as a business. He asked him, can you do this? He's like, oh yeah, sure. So he set it up, and at that point we realized, oh, this is actually pretty cool. This is some really cool technology that can help a lot of people, a lot of call centers be more productive. Because that's really the problem that it solved, is making your call center agents more productive, increasing their talk time, their connections. And so at that point, we realized, okay, there's other friends that we had that had mortgage companies. This is before the 2008 crash, right? So mortgages were still hot, that space. And so we started just kind of getting friends that we knew to start using the software, and it turned into a business. So we kind of just fell into it.
That's great. That's amazing. Is your brother? Is your brother older than you, or is he a younger brother, or who's the oldest here?
He's older. He's older by 3 years, and I call him like kind of the mad scientist in a way.
Yeah.
Because he's a maniac about solving problems, and he will not let go until a problem is solved. And when it comes to technology, there's always a problem. I don't care what your technology, how great it is. There's always going to be a problem.
Oh, that's an amazing trait, though, and so perfect for what you guys are doing, based on what you just said too. With technology, there's always some issue, there's always something going on. But not only that, it sort of enables you to not stay stagnant, right? To always be developing what the next solution is for the problem. And that's what's really cool. Another thing that I sort of learned about Convoso is that, granted, you guys have been well established for 14 years and growing, but you're continuing to sort of develop. So give me sort of, I know you guys actually, I think, was it 2016 that you redeveloped your the platform for the most part? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so once we launched in 2006, right, we were growing every year over year. But then what happened was Vichidal is very buggy. The software just does not work well. It crashes. The reporting is bad. And so in a call center, if you have bad reports and you have downtime, it's death. I mean, your call center will not survive. So we're going through this phase where from growth, we started actually declining in revenue and losing customers. And so we spent 3 years rebuilding, and we actually tried 3 separate times with 3 separate development teams internally to rebuild it before we got it right. So in 2016, I want to say after about 2-3 years, we rebuilt it and relaunched it. And at that point, the focus became really increasing your contact rate, because that's the biggest problem that call centers have. Nobody wants to pick up the phone anymore, right? I mean, I don't, unless I know who's calling.
Yeah.
And so you really have to get smarter around, like, how are you going to reach out? What's your strategy going to be, your outreach strategy? And that's kind of where we went from what we had before to where it is at now.
So tell me, just to take a step back, because I do want to get into some of those best practices with content, but I'm really curious to know about, going through that process, or however many years it was where you guys were rebuilding and working with different time, three times over, trying something and not working. What was that like? I mean, how frustrating was that? And did you ever think that, I mean, you guys were stuck using Avicii, or was it never was it always
Oh
just
man,
moving forward?
I mean, I thought we would never get. So our biggest problem at that time was that it was just the uptime of the service was not there, right? Every day there was a problem, and so I didn't at some point I wasn't always sure if are we ever going to get out of this phase of having that uptime, because if your dialer does not work at all times, forget about it.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of sleepless nights where it's like, I don't know if we're ever going to get through this. It seemed like it was the norm, but we didn't give up, right? That's the point in business. Like, I think the biggest secret, and it's so simple, but it's not for a lot of people, just don't ever give up. If you keep going, eventually you will find a way. And so, we hired different developers. And I think at that point, the problem was that, you kind of get what you pay for, right? We were hiring developers that were not underpaid, underqualified to do what we wanted them to do. And then the expectations was unrealistic as well. So kind of going through that learning curve of understanding what's possible and who do you have that's trying to do that? Do they have the capacity to do what you're asking of them to do? And so, we launched the version, we tried it, it didn't work out, it was still buggy. Then we tried to rebuild it again. And then the main developer that we had decided to quit, right? So we hired someone new that actually had started a week before him. It was just one guy. He looked at the code, and after a week, he said, "You know what? The amount of time it's going to take to continue is just, I might as well just rebuild it." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" And we trusted him.
Yeah.
There's a level of trust that we had in him. And, he rebuilt it. But through that process, we learned every single time, right? It's through your failures. Like everyone says, like, you actually really do learn. And if you embrace that failure in business, you'll do well. But if you let it get to you and you let it defeat you, that's kind of where it doesn't work
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, that's great advice. I can't imagine. I mean, you were probably getting the phone calls from clients and just the pressure of not being up and, having the uptime not being where it needed to be. I mean, and
So
then
my
all the
phone,
money and the cash going out on these developers that were not getting to where you needed to go. I mean, it must have been crazy.
yeah, I mean, yes, exactly. So that's where we were, right? That's at that point where we were the revenue was just stagnant because we were bringing in as much as we were losing the next month. It's all recurring revenue. They pay us, our customers pay us on a monthly
Yeah.
basis. But yeah, the calls were not fun. I'll tell you that much, because we had clients on the East Coast. You're getting calls at like 5 a.m, yelling and screaming, and that's understandable, right? You've got a call center with agents sitting there. You're paying them. You're not producing, so it's a loss across the board. And my phone is on vibrate now because of that. Just to understand the story, like, I do not like a ringtone on my phone.
Oh my
Just
God.
because of those calls that we would get. We used to do support, right? This when we started, it was just me, Bobby, and a couple other guys, and we were doing everything: support, sales, tech, everything.
Yeah, every time it rings, a negative trigger in your mind. You're like, "Oh shit, I'm not gonna pick that phone up." um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so you learn, you go through that, and I'm sure that shapes a lot of what you guys do today from a developmental standpoint, and not only that, but a customer service standpoint. I mean, how is your focus sort of getting through those times continue to improve what you offer to your clients today?
Good question. So it's obviously not just about the technology, because the technology is one piece of it, but the
Yeah.
other part of it that comes on to it, and it's really defined as customer success. But it's not even just a department; it's a mindset as a company, right? Like, how do we help our customers be successful? Because at the end of the day, the technology has its capabilities, but helping our customers implement it and do it successfully is a whole nother piece. And so that's where learned through that experience that we have to take a hands-on approach by, going through the onboarding process of not only showing them how to use it, but beyond the onboarding, after the fact, is, are they using it the right way, right? Like, are they getting the most out of it? Because we're experts in the technology. They're not. They're experts in their business, whether you're an insurance company, mortgage company, whatever you might be. So we learned through that process that we actually have to help you understand how to use the system to achieve the goals you want to. As long as we understand your goals, we can help you get there. And that's oftentimes a forgotten piece when it comes to technology. It's like, here you go, you figure it out. We got the sale, you're paying us, you'll just figure it out. And that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and that's another thing that sort of caught my attention again on your LinkedIn profile was I think you mentioned you had I think it was enormous passion for helping clients be successful. And I think if you find a business or whatever it is that you're passionate about, and it's actually really helping them be successful, then the product sort of comes along and continues to evolve and it becomes a better tool for those clients when you have that passion. If it's just a matter of, like you said, building something and just throwing it out there for them to use, it's you're kind of you're stuck, right? You're not going to continue to improve.
Yeah. I mean, I would say to add to that is, you got to listen to your customers, right? Talk to them, be in touch with them, because they're at the heart of things. I mean, they're experiencing their world, and you want to understand their world so you can understand how to solve those problems, not just for today, but also for tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think that's the other part.
So, okay. So, getting back to the actual platform, you mentioned it's getting harder and harder to get a hold of people just from a straight outbound dial. And I don't think there's anybody would argue that, even though, people have their mobile phones at their, in their pocket, wherever they are, but people just don't necessarily pick up the phone if they don't know what the phone number is, right? So how does, Convoso sort of help navigate that challenge?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the biggest problem today is that most call centers beat their leads to death. They're going to just keep calling and calling and calling. Guess what? Now your caller IDs are getting flagged as scam, likely spam from marketer, right? What you see happening, which immediately puts down your contact rate. So that strategy of just beating your leads to death just doesn't work anymore. You can try, but eventually you'll fail doing it that way. And so what we do differently is there's two really key components to this. You're reporting, looking at the data and having the ability to understand the quality of your leads and how your agents are working them. So understanding the true ROI of your lead sources. And most call centers just look on it on a cost per lead basis. You're just saying, hey, this is how much we spend on leads, and this is how much it took to generate a sale or conversion, whatever it might be. But that's just a small piece of it. You need to understand and look at how much time did it take to try to convert those leads, right? The agent's time that you're potentially paying them for their time, and then the cost of the dialer as well. So the cost of the leads, the cost of the dialer, the cost of the agent's time, those typically represent the majority of the cost. They may not be everything if you want to look at the CPA, but our reporting gives you the ability to calculate that in real time by the list, so the lead source, or even by the agents, so you can see which agents are generating more revenue. And once you have that information, to give you an example, there was a customer that spent like $2 per lead on one set of leads and like 50 cents on another. And you might say people are afraid to spend more on these, because at the end of the day, it's a volume. I mean, you're buying a lot of leads, so it makes a difference. But they didn't realize that they were spending 50% more talk time trying to convert to 50-cent leads. They didn't know that.
Yeah.
So once they made that switch, it really made a huge, huge difference. So,
that's awesome. Because you're absolutely right. When, whether you're a lead buyer or a call center, whatever it may be, sometimes you think you just get the cheapest data, it's going to lower your costs and blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's, people know that they don't convert quite at the same rate as maybe a more expensive lead, but users can input their hard costs into the system so they can calculate the true cost of these different campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, so either through an API, you can, when you upload the leads, you can identify how much it was, or we have an integration, a built-in integration with Leadspedia, which really does things really well when it comes to that part of it, because you route your leads through Leadspedia and you identify how much you paid for them. And through our API in real time, it sends that data back to us. So it's either through them or our own API where you'll have that information available to you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Does it also take into account the call center reps costs, right? So their hourly wage and that sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly. You can put the cost, and if you're paying different agents a different amount, you can put that in there, and it will calculate it for you.
Yeah. That's great. So I want to take a step backwards a little bit because you did mention something that even I've seen on my iPhone when it comes up a spam. I think it's a spam risk or there's something there. It might be there's a couple different messages I think that come up on a call now, and it also guesses who it might be too, right? It says, oh, this may be
Right.
Nima, even though you're not in my contacts, but you're in my email and some other things. So my first question really is. What are companies sort of doing to sort of navigate around that spam message risk? And is there anything from a best practice standpoint that they can do to avoid being labeled a spam risk or a phone number, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I mean, there's several different things, and the long-term solution and what the easiest fix, which even that is still isn't foolproof, but you need to register your numbers. There is a company called Numerical, and I think Newstar does this as well, where you can register your number there so that it's whitelisted in a sense. But that isn't always practical because if you're doing local caller IDs and you're calling, to have different campaigns, now you might have thousands of numbers.
Yeah.
So that's one way of doing it. The other way is you really need to, what I call is balance the load of your caller IDs. You need to have a system in place that will say, for example, don't make more than 100 calls a day for this caller ID. And so with Convoso, you have the ability to look at your call data and where you called or your leads, and it will make a recommendation that says you need to get this many numbers, like 100 numbers in these area codes. And at that point, you're not making, because at the end of the day, the companies are getting flagged because you're making a certain number of calls with that same number. And it's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's just if you're a legitimate business and you're making these calls to these leads that are, TCPA compliant, you should have the ability to have the opportunity to talk to that person and not, be shown as a scam of, it's just not fair.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's just that, and that's the unfortunate, right? I mean, these cellular carriers are trying to do their best at reducing some of this, the fraudulent calls and all that sort of stuff, or the spam calls. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of companies that are getting inquiries, and there are people raising their hand saying, "Hey, give me a call," and then they call from that number, and it looks like it's a spam, labeled a spam, call.
Exactly.
And that's a problem. Do you think that's going to continue to get tighter or worse, or I mean, what do you think the future of that is?
Well, the biggest thing that's going to change is the stir shaken, right, which is what's going to get implemented by next June. So the FCC has mandated that all telco companies implement that. And what stir shaken is one piece of that is that you can no longer spoof caller IDs, which is great. That's honestly, it should help clean up this industry from all the bad actors that are using essentially caller IDs that don't belong to them. You can put any number you want right now as a caller ID. It could be a disconnected phone number. And that's how a lot of these scammers get away with it, right? So once that gets implemented, essentially what happens is it's the telco company has to, that your caller ID needs to be validated. You can no longer put a number that no longer belongs to you. And so I think that will help, clean things up. And then beyond that, you really need to have a good dialing strategy in place, right? How often you're going to dial the leads, especially if you're generating real-time leads. I mean, I can talk, a little bit more about that as well in terms of how you're supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised how most dialers, your dialing strategy is, we're just going to keep calling every half an hour, every 10 minutes. You need to have a cadence that goes outside of the norm of the redial attempt, or recycle logic is what they call it, right? So what we've done is you could set a schedule that says when you get a lead coming in, try calling it right away. And if they don't respond, follow it up with a text message, and then maybe try again in 10 minutes, maybe in 2 hours, maybe in 5, and then you kind of taper it off. You want to be aggressive in the first day or two, because if you don't get in touch with those first couple of days, then the contact rate goes down considerably. But be aggressive the first couple of days, and then kind of let it go into a campaign where you try again maybe in 30 days from now. But that strategy, you'd be surprised, most call centers, at least the medium-sized ones. The bigger ones, to some extent, do, but most just don't have a good strategy in place. They're just, let's just call these leads, keep calling them to death.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard horror stories. I'm sure you have too, right? Where there's on one end, there's companies that will dial, hundreds of times, in a week, and continue to just hammer the leads or whatever. But then I also hear, there's companies that will dial twice a day, morning and evening, whatever it is, and it's twice a day, every day. And that's really not that intelligent either, right? I mean, if you're calling at the same time every day and not getting a hold of somebody, it's probably, you could probably be doing it better, right? I mean, so what, from your point of view, what you see from time of day? Obviously, you're going to call the lead as soon as possible, but after that, what's sort of the best practices for scheduling follow-up calls?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on kind of the industries, I would say, for sure. But again, it also depends on the quality of your leads, right? Like, how good of a lead is it? Because if it's somebody who actually, if it's a real-time lead, but one where they expressed interest in your product or service, versus like a co-reg where the intent is low, right? Low intent versus high intent, you have to use different strategies. So we find with real-time leads, regardless of the industry, you need to try breaking up the pattern. And there's no set way of doing it, I guess what I'm trying to say, because there's other variables involved with the quality of your leads, the source. It just really depends. But what matters is that you have to break up the patterns, and then you analyze the result. And after how many attempts does the contact rate not increase? And that's, I think, something that most people don't look at. They just keep calling it. You should take a look at it. If it's the 5th attempt, 10th attempt, but you need to look at the data, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you. And data will tell you that. And most systems don't have good reporting in place to give you that information.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to name a company, but when I was working at a call center, I mean, it was one of the bigger dialer companies, and there was no reporting. And then we're talking, probably one of the top dialers out there that people use, and the reporting was horrible. And in fact, most of the people that you worked at that company didn't even know how to use the system themselves, let alone, help you properly optimize the technology. And that just goes back to what we were talking about before about, how it's not just about building the software. It's really about helping people, utilize it. But one thing I've been thinking about, and I came across, somebody mentioned it to me, and it goes back to what I said about cell phones identifying who's coming in via some other way. So, for example, if you were to call me right now from your phone number, it would guess that it's me, even though you're not in my contact. And I believe that's because you're in my email, potentially, and I think it will recognize something, or maybe it's an out. I'm not really sure how.
Yeah, it reads your emails. It looks at your emails and different information on your phone through different ways like that. It knows. But there is another strategy actually. If you're generating a lead online and they fill out the form, on that thank you page, you can put a link in there that says add this number to my phone as a contact, right? So that way it is a recognizable contact and you may not get blocked. So I would really recommend also doing that. And if it is your own generated lead, then there's a code you can put on there that just says add this number to my contacts.
That's a great idea, because where I was kind of going with this was that for so many years, call centers were trying to utilize local DIDs or different phone numbers and all these sorts of things. And they were rotating them through hundreds and thousands of different phone numbers, trying to like almost trick the person to pick up the phone, right? But maybe the strategy these days is to have a phone number that people know and they expect, hey, this brand is calling me and I see it right here, and not trying to hide behind a local area code, or trying to make it look like it's a family member calling you, or whatever it is. Maybe that needs to be a paradigm shift in how people are looking at calls and outbounds.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what side of you are you a lead buyer or the lead generator, lead seller, right? Because if you're the lead seller, then I mean, you can't really What
Right.
name are you going to put on there? Hey, we're a marketing company. We're trying to sell.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
but
that's a good point. Yeah.
but I do agree from a lead buyer perspective, you should represent who you are, because at the end of the day, they express interest in your services, and the more clear you can make that to them, the more likely they're going to want to talk to you.
Yeah.
On the lead seller side, you just need to use good best practices. Do not abuse the consumer by calling them a million times in hopes of getting them on the phone.
Yeah. So one of the things that other dialers and even the big boys don't have is texting integrated within the dialer, but it sounds like you guys do.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of dials actually you could send out one-off text messages, right, on an ad hoc basis. That's not really omni-channel. And the way we look at it is you need to have the ability to create a cadence and essentially map out what that looks like when a lead comes in, from calling the lead to texting it, emailing it. So using these various channels to try to engage them. And texting is, of course, the most widely used in the sense of getting a response. So people read most of the text messages, right? So being able to drop that text or send that text upon if a call doesn't get answered, or even ahead of time, if they're filling out the form, you can always send a text. Hey, we noticed you filled out the form on our website looking for more information. Why don't you give us a call and we can help you further? And then through that text message, they can call that number and it goes straight into the dialer, and they can continue that conversation.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Now the texting has the same challenges though, right? With deliverability, right? I mean, there's still was it this last year that the big carriers again were saying that they're actually filtering out texts and not even sending them through because they're coming from high volume numbers. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, anything high volume, whether it's calls or texting that you do now, right? Calls are getting blocked. I mean, even more so. You have the U.S. Telecom Association that monitors. It's pretty interesting, actually. They monitor calls, and if something looks abnormal, they will block the call. And the same goes with text messages. So they're working with all the major telecom carriers to share that data so they can figure it out. And so ultimately, what you want to do is don't do volume in the sense of, like I said, whether it's calling you or even texting them. You need to be very strategic at what stage. We like to put a text at the beginning of the process and maybe another follow-up, but don't keep trying to mass text your leads. It's just not a good practice.
Yeah, because I think I read in the same article was that if there was a lot of text messages that were going out that weren't getting responses back, that could affect the deliverability as well. I don't know. Is there any accuracy to that?
Good question. I'd have to look to kind of see how our statistics, what they tell us.
Yeah. I just didn't know how that was sort of work. So with all these challenges with contacting, I mean, what would be, your best, what's your sort of wish list on how the regulators and other entities are tackling spam and fraud and all this sort of stuff that wouldn't affect legitimate brands just trying to pick up the phone and contact inquiries? I mean, what's sort of, because it seems like it could be an overreach where it really screws everybody up, and you can't, even legitimate brands can't get a hold of their clients or their prospects. So I mean, kind of where do you see this all kind of going? How would you like to see it go?
Well, ultimately, I think, having you register your numbers is going to be a big deal. I think that will help a lot. So at the end of the day, if you're doing things responsibly in the right way, you can do things the right way and be profitable. I think that's the thing that most call centers don't realize that are doing lead generation, whether they're a lead seller or a lead buyer. But registering your numbers, the way that leads get generated, I don't think you're going to, ultimately that partner pages list, that has like 1,000 names on there. I think there's going to be some changes there in terms of how that's going to work, because in a sense that gives them permission to sell that leads to that whole list, right? And so there's best practices around saying, like, you should say, for example, up to five partners, but some don't do that. You'd be surprised how many of these landing pages I've taken a look at that they're not compliant. So I think there's going to be some changes in terms of to how many the lead can be sold to, and really making that a requirement, more specific language around it that will essentially bring down the number of people that are only calling that lead, because you don't want to sell that lead to as many people as possible. At the end of the day, everybody will suffer. Your conversion rate goes down. So the quality of leads will go up. I think the cost of these will continue to go up as a result, but the conversion rates should go up, because now you're making calls to more qualified leads, and those that are not getting harassed to where they're more open to taking a call.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this continues to evolve. How much responsibility do you guys take into? You just mentioned looking at pages and all this sort of stuff. I mean, with the data going into Convoso and different brands or lead generators using the system, do you guys have any responsibility to ensure that the data is compliant, or what's your position? What's Convoso's position on oversight of some of this stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So when we get somebody new coming on board, we do ask them questions around have they been in a lawsuit, kind of anything that they've experienced, so we can get a good background on this person whom we're dealing with. And then setting them up on the system, we tell them how they need to be compliant. Now, we don't go and monitor the account, because we could be held liable if we touch the account and make some changes and it impacts them, then we're held responsible. So we don't go that far into looking at it, but at the end of the day, we want them to be successful. So if we see something there that is wrong, we'll let them know about it, and they need to make the changes. And yeah, at the end of the day, if they're not responsible and they go out of business, it hurts us as well. So we want to do everything we can to help them be responsible. We even put on webinars where we tell them about the TCPA and all the changes going on. We're actually doing one next week with Michelle Schuster from McMurray & Schuster. So,
great.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend everyone to take a look. It's really informative. You'd be surprised how many people don't know the basics around compliance.
Yeah, well, it's so tricky too, because it seems to always be evolving. It's not like it's not written in stone. It seems to be based on case law and what happens. It seems to change frequently. And Michelle is great. So when is that, and how would they go about signing up? Do they just go to Convoso and register for that?
Yeah, it's on the 22nd, I believe. Let me see here. Yeah, it's on the 22nd at 11 a.m. And if you go to our LinkedIn page, I believe the webinar, you could register for the webinar there.
Okay.
And we'll talk also about like the legal ramifications of going remote, right? Because everybody's now working remotely, but there's a lot of legal sides of it that you have to take into account. And I think a lot of call centers weren't set up for that. So we're going to be covering those points as well.
Yeah. So tell me about that. I was going to ask you, how that's sort of working out with some clients, and tell me maybe just a little teaser on what some of those things are like, that they have to be concerned about. Obviously, oversight is an issue, right? It's one thing to have, a web-based SaaS platform, a dialer that you can pull up on your home computer, but the oversight with data privacy and all that sort of stuff has got to be a huge issue, right?
Right. Data privacy for sure. I mean, you really need to make sure that, well, one, who has access to what data, and being able to log that information in terms of what's happening, who's pulling what. But access control permissions essentially comes into play there, right? Where you limit who has access to what. I would say that's a big deal. Ultimately, there's no way you can be 100% foolproof safe against anything at the end of the day. If somebody wants to exploit some things, but you need to have systems in place that will monitor it, and you limit who has access to it. And then the other side of it is more from an HR side, that like what happens if, for example, you go on your computer and the internet doesn't work. There's a problem there. Do you pay them for that time? Do you not? So we're going to be covering those aspects of it, which I'm learning myself about as well. I mean, it's really interesting to, take all those things into consideration when you go remote that you don't even think about.
Yeah, that is, yeah. I didn't even think of, like you said, didn't even think about those aspects, from the HR standpoint. So obviously most all of your clients, unless they're in some state that doesn't have a lockdown, which I think there may be one or two, but
Right.
Everybody's locked down, everyone's in their home. How has been the, your perception, the general shift from, clients moving into remote? Has it been generally okay? Have they sort of figured out? Have some just decided they're not going to do anything for the next, month, or
Yeah.
what's your view on, how your clients and different companies have made this shift?
You know what? I'm pleasantly surprised. I would say more majority of them have been able to make that shift. But the reason why I'm surprised is because when you go home, one, your computers, right? You really need to have preferably not a personal computer, but like a company provided computer that would be like a Chromebook, making sure there's nothing else on it. Your internet connection is stable. And so there's a lot of variables there that I would imagine if you're having to make that change quickly overnight, over 1 week to the next, that there's going to be some situations where there's going to be some bumps. But I would say for the most part, like 80-90% of our customers have been able to make that switch. The ones that haven't, they've never gone remote. So that's obviously one challenge, but I feel like they probably they just didn't have systems in place and reporting in place to be able to manage their agents the right way. So there's been some that have been affected that just couldn't make that switch. And they're just on hold, which is really, it's just terrible because you have lost jobs. I mean, hopefully we'll get out of this quickly so that everybody can get back on board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So call centers, obviously some of the, the two biggest costs are obviously overhead with their office and of course, their staff. Having somebody, do you expect some of these companies to sort of stay remote, or I guess that just depends on company culture, but do you think some of these different operations will allow their call center representatives to stay at a work from home environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to depend on the overall results that they're seeing, of course, but I would say there's probably going to be more flexibility because if you can do that remote, the sky's the limit for talent, right? The other problem that call centers have is staffing your call center. I mean, the turnover rate obviously is high, but if you can figure out a way to go remote, now you have access to a much larger pool. So I would say that there's going to be some that will probably be more flexible and others that, like you said, depending on your company culture, you just want them to be under one roof at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay. So just one, to take another turn here. Do you guys work across obviously you're industry agnostic. It does your platform can work for any industry
Right.
there is. But you guys are fairly focused on we've been talking lead gen. Obviously, it's Lead Gen World podcast. So you work with lead generators and then also buyers. But are you at this point, is that sort of your main focus, or is it also the greater customer service landscape that you guys can work in?
Our focus is exclusively on anyone that does lead generation. I think that's what makes us different than some of the other bigger players out there, is that we're looking to solve lead gen problems of today and tomorrow and really be proactive around that.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, okay, last question. Where is there any like new when it comes to the development of Convoso, not to give away any roadmap secrets or anything like that, but is there anything that you can share with regarding to continuing to develop Convoso that's taking place today that you think would it's going to help benefit your clients?
Yeah, everybody talks about AI.
Yeah.
We're working on something really big when it comes to AI that while we have an AI product today, it's the next version of that that's really going to help solve a very specific problem for call centers that we're looking to launch later this year. So it'll be a really exciting product. Can't wait for people to have it.
Yes. Okay. So you opened up a can here with mentioning AI, and there's always there's different levels of AI, and people throw out the word AI, and when really it's maybe just
rules.
Rules. Yeah, exactly. So tell me, what's your just vision on AI, just generally speaking, not specifically for Convoso, but from a contact standpoint. Is it something that can really be utilized in a appropriate fashion when you're talking about conversational AI that really works to make an operation more efficient? I mean, is that realistic?
Yeah, I think it all depends on how you apply it. It can't work for everyone and every business and every, let's just say, type of lead. But yes, I definitely think that if you approach it the right way, that there's a space and place for it. But again, it's not for everything. Everyone doesn't solve every problem. So I'll just say it depends on what your strategy is, what kind of lead are you generating, and what are you trying to do with that lead? Because it will never replace having a full on, for example, taking the lead through the whole cycle and through the whole sale. In a sense, that's what I believe. But there is a certain degree that it can get to getting to that point. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, that'll be exciting to hear, and you know, how that continues to develop, and I think it's really cool to see you guys continue to just develop and improve the contact strategy, which is such I mean, so when you look at the process or the funnel of leads, you've got the generation of data, which is obviously one of the most important factors. But once that data is generated, then it's how do you get a hold of that person, which is, I mean, one could argue that's almost the most important and most challenging factor for being successful with leads. So it's cool to watch a company continue to refine and focus and improve that process. That's going to be so significant in so many different brands and companies' process. So
Definitely.
more of just a statement than anything. How does anybody get a hold of you if they want to find out more about Convoso? Obviously, they just go to convoso.com, and I'll put it up here. But anything else? You mentioned the LinkedIn page as well. Is that a good place?
Yeah. If you go to our Convoso LinkedIn page on Convoso, yeah, you can also call us or get a hold of me. My email is Hakimi, NHAKIMI @convoso.com. And yeah, otherwise our website has a lot of information on there as well.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you spending the time with me. I wish you the best of luck, and I look forward to the webinar next week with Michelle. And I look forward to tracking Convoso's success, man. I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Likewise, Michael, it was great. I had a good time, and talk soon. Stay safe.
All right, thanks.